and welcome to another episode of Growth Unplugged. Today with me we have Ehab Beshay. He's a seasoned leader with huge amount of experience from automotive, aerospace, defense, and electronics. Ehab, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Ehab, for all our listeners, is a seasoned manufacturing leader. He's been doing digital transformation and Industry 4.0 in automotive and electronics even before the word caught up steam where everybody started talking about it. So I wanted to welcome him into the studio where we could kind of talk about multiple topics. He brings a very good amount of experience where he's seen the old, he's seen the new, and he's seeing basically what's coming in the future. So welcome again, Ehab.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. If you could tell about your personal journey, a little bit about yourself.
Let me start from the beginning. I got my bachelor in mechanical engineering and I got my master in computer science. And my first job out of school was kind of two opportunities. One of them would have been ended to be in pharma and more on the design side. And another one actually was opportunity in manufacturing and electronics, aerospace and defense, and high telecommunication. Out of school, being new, and being an engineer, also I like tinkering with gadgets. So when I went for that interview, I saw, wow, a lot of automation, a lot of equipment building these electronics products. I kind of liked it, and I decided to go with this route, and I never looked back. And that's what I ended in manufacturing for pretty much all my career. It's an exciting journey, but I started actually with contract manufacturing in electronics for aerospace and defense, and moved on to the automotive section. I stayed in automotive for some time, and I did actually hold multiple roles. And in manufacturing, I started as a process engineer, manufacturing engineer, project engineer. I got into automation, and I also led multiple groups in advanced manufacturing, specifically in the automotive section. And I had opportunities to be an expat as well in Mexico. And I built, it was an actually interesting experience. Definitely, I learned a lot from it. And also, I was able to build teams and for manufacturing and in Europe, in Asia as well. So I have exposure globally. And now I'm actually consulting with clients. So I have exposure in multiple different verticals in industry and helping clients actually solving problems in manufacturing, applying again initiatives from Industry 4.0 and digital transformation, and specifically now actually AI, Gen AI, actually use cases as well.
Interesting. What's kept you passionate about digital transformation in manufacturing? I'm always curious to know. 20-year-old is obviously going to be passionate about like tech, right? But I always am curious as to, why would somebody as a seasoned leader like you would be passionate? So what's on your mind there?
Well, let's start actually how did this actually came to be, like digital transformation, digital manufacturing, smart manufacturing. It's was actually was all the automation started actually with the automation piece, getting robotics, automating actually repetitive tasks. But once you start actually looking into the process, and not just in manufacturing, but also the business process, and there's so many opportunities for improvement. And how do you digitize some of these workflows in manufacturing and help, again, whether the operators or the supervisors, the engineers, how can you help them solve these problems that they're running on facing on daily basis to make sure their job easier? And with the automation, actually, there were more data available on these processes now. You're able to measure more actually, and more in more frequent, so a higher frequency, and you have more data. And there's actually becoming to be like too much data to be able to actually get into, and you need to find digital tools to help you actually give you insights about how can you improve these processes and actually get more out of what you're building, and give you the visibility to production, and at the same time help you understand where you need to actually improve to produce more.
I'm always fascinated about whether it is digital transformation, but just technology in general is so much now in manufacturing that it's actually a very exciting opportunity from a career standpoint in manufacturing. Like for almost many years, I used to think that manufacturing was looked at, just to work in a factory, and people would do that for a few years, but then didn't want to do it anymore. You've been around quite a while, so are there, on the personal side, are you seeing basically careers being reimagined here?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, manufacturing is no longer about this actually, again, this low paid repetitive jobs that actually used to be the case, or people think about it back then. There's much more opportunities today because a lot about problem solving, how you can actually get more done with less resources when it comes to it. And there's so much actually, again, as far as problems that can be solved and looking for these actually talents that can actually help solve these problems. Now, with these technologies coming in, the potential is actually, again, there's no limit to the potential of actually how much you can do. And specifically now, actually, when we look into Gen AI, applying that and finding actually, again, how you can help manufacturers improve, how you can help these operators and resources, how you improve their daily life and assist them. There's so many opportunities. Just some of them, again, a lot of actually these manufacturers just don't know what can be done. So that's where these talents actually have these opportunities to help manufacturers improve.
When I've been talking to a lot of small business owners, one of the things that I'm seeing as a common pattern is that manufacturers traditionally tend to look at solving problems by looking at a solution in the form of a machine, right? So earlier it was like, hey, I want to make more products. So say, okay, let's go and buy a much more high speed machine. And then that solves your problem. And fast forward to the last 10, 15 years, if you basically look at software has basically, as digital tools, have pretty much followed this one, that if you want to do better, then get X software or Y software. But the common thread in all this is the data, and you spoke about data at the start. So can you share some examples of how modern tools are simplifying data capture or visualization, or just what's the role of data in general?
That's a good question. So yeah, to your point, yes, it used to be again spending to get the newer equipment, the latest robotics, and that was actually again that's how I get more. Then it's again the software. How can you improve in terms of the software side? It comes down to basically you're trying to produce more with less that I mentioned earlier. But in order to expand or manufacturer actually think about capacity. I want to get more done. In order to do that, adding additional lines requires additional expenses. Adding additional software license requires additional expenses. In many cases, you only have visibility to what you see or what's available in terms of data. But there are so much data that's not being utilized today and is not tapped into yet. In a lot of actually, the buzzword today is again Gen AI and applying Gen AI. The problem with that is for even to start actually getting into Gen AI, you need to see how much data you have available because that's where Gen AI would actually work or these use cases will need to work on top of that. And building that data models on the asset and understanding what specific data attributes required or available even, not just required. And tying that to your KPIs, what you're going to measure because if you can't measure it, you cannot improve it. And in order to get to capacity up and produce more, you need to understand at least how much can you get done with the assets you have today. And that's probably the first question most manufacturers trying to get answered. I can see so much potential, and in many cases, working with clients, you can see productivity increases 10, 20, 30, 40%. It really depends, and again, it's just how much are you able to work to get to that level of efficiency. We're going to get into other aspects to how to get to that, but in terms of data, it's huge to build that data pipeline and contextualize data and normalize the data to make sure it's accessible and available for all the applications that require the data and use cases that you don't even know today you need. And that's the point. Sometimes, again, like I mentioned, manufacturing Manufacturers do not know sometimes that they have a specific problem, or some resources that they can tap into that they didn't even know. So rather than having to go, and that's most of the cases to build a business case and justification of a business case to where do you need to spend your resources. You can either go build the brick and mortar sites, get your additional equipments to build more, expand your business. But before you do that, can I actually get more from what I have and with much lower cost? And that's where this comes in. Data. How can you actually get the data and utilize the data?
What, in your experience, Ehab, do you see manufacturers as, where when we talk about data, what kind of data do most manufacturers, in your experience, have a lot, and what do you think they don't have and that they should be collecting?
So manufacturers have like a mix of newer assets with automated assets, and also today there are still actually older assets or older equipments. And the level of data available is different between these type of assets based on the KPI. Like I'll mention again, like you're starting with like asset utilizations. You're trying to understand, and if you get into like OEE and measurement, where you're trying to look at your equipment availability, downtime, looking at performance, you're looking at your quality, and associate what specific data variables or data points that you need from these assets to measure these KPIs and to get to that point. But on top of that, specifically when it comes to, and some of the things that again that's just it can help but it's not being even looked at yet, is how can you improve the process and detect actually quality issues, predict issues before it happens, and find a root cause of a problem. That, like, because typically again the problem happens, they have a quality issue, and you go back and find what happened and try to solve it and put some actually measures to make sure it avoided in the future. But what if actually your process and your equipment is giving you hints of changes in real time, but you don't know what's going on because you don't have that visibility yet. And there are additional data that these machines actually can provide: a change in pressure, a change in temperature. It's still maybe within actually the limits, because typically limits may be set low, set high. It just shows in the parameters. But there's a signature for some of these issues that happen in quality, that when you have this a large set of data, that you can actually start looking. This is a signature of when I actually produce good quality product. And when I start when I see variations out of that, and I start seeing this actually changes and variations happening, I'm predicting, yes, there's something going to happen on the quality of the product. And then you can actually trigger a real-time response to that. And there's so many actually variables. I mentioned temperature, pressure, vibration. Also, again, now is one of the variables that's actually really critical when it comes to predictive maintenance and measurement, the location of measurements on a pump or a motor, and seeing the vibration and monitoring actually the vibration and seeing the temperature on a bearing in the and getting a signature of what's good, so you can actually understand when it turns to be an issue that you need to look into and predict the failure. And that's significantly improved. That there's a lot of prediction now. You can predict when a pump or a motor will fail at a certain point. Most manufacturers, you cannot keep every part in stock for as a spare. So you need to be able to specifically understand and plan ahead to make sure that it's not going to be catastrophic when you have a really urgent order that needs to get out, but you're down. So there's so many aspects, but it starts with what you're trying to measure and map the attributes and the data points that you need. And then actually again finding how much more available on these equipment that can get out, that you can actually be able to get and extract. And there's so many variables on equipment now, especially actually newer assets that provide again that movement. You can actually optimize the path of a robot actually to reduce 1 second, 2 seconds. And for high manufacturing, for high speed manufacturing, that's so important. And that's where this data actually becomes very critical.
Sounds like my latest Apple Watch can even take my heart rate, it can do ECG, etc. And it sounds like the newer assets in manufacturing are like that. They're much more capable in when it comes to collecting data, but then every factory would also have a legacy set of machines, or like my old Casio watch, which was digital, it could do a stopwatch and it could do many more things. Like it was like more, when I wanted to do rather than automatically doing many of the things itself. So I see on my Apple Watch, right, my heart rate, every like periodically it just keeps measuring it and it keeps tracking. But I didn't see that happen in my Casio watch many years ago. The digital calculator was the first digital watch that my dad had given me. So I'm looking at that analogy, but for our listeners, who probably never even seen a factory, like, could we do a quick what is session here, because your answer had like a lot of loaded words. So what is OEE? Let's start with that.
So OEE is a good question. OEE is overall equipment effectivity, and it's a matrix actually where you're actually understanding and combining three actually different measurements. The availability of the equipment, meaning like is the equipment down or not, or if it's available to produce. Mainly it's about downtime of the machines. And the performance, which basically are you building or making your product and meeting the target set? If you're supposed to produce 50 units per hour, are you producing 50 units per hour more, or maybe you're doing 20 per hour? And the quality, how many actually good parts that you're able to get out of that time period versus bad parts. It's a measurement, it's a KPI to look at from a high level to say, hey, am I doing good, or is there something I need to get into? Very much. It's used to compare, typically for comparison among different sites or different similar lines. But once you start seeing, hey, you set a target, and if you're actually below that target, typically, okay, you need to start digging into, is it the availability piece of this? Is it the performance? Is it the quality? It doesn't tell you directly. You need to start looking into down into that more.
Sounds like a comparison of the traditional school system that I studied in versus what my son studies today. So when I studied, the whole focus was on my productivity in terms of how much I could get out, how much I could memorize. So if I could memorize and throw out, it was
Exactly.
great, but the focus was not really on the quality of knowledge that I had, and also just did I do it basically in the time I was supposed to? And I see my son's teacher, Ehab, where he's going to be given math sums that he has to complete in 5 minutes. So there's a standard to do those 100 sums, and if he gets it wrong, they got to do it again. But if he comes and says I did everything, and unless it is not 100%, he doesn't get to go forward. So they're checking quality as to how good is he at addition, subtraction. They're also checking for his speed, and then they are basically giving on top to him like word problems to say, let's see if you understood addition and subtraction basically in a different way, because we need to know if you can really apply it. And is that a good analogy to say what OEE is?
It is because you're looking at different aspects and combining that in one number. To your
Nice.
point, that's very good analogy. I like that. And because of that, again, like I mentioned, it's comparison, and you start drilling down. And once you every one of those, like those, the availability, the performance, the quality, there is a lot more to it. So once you
Sure.
drill down on every one of those, there is more to get to. And that what you start with Zoe, just a simple number. But when you start drilling down, getting to the root cause, it's an effort. It takes time. And it gets us back to that data again, the data piece. Manufacturers don't have the unlimited resources when it comes to engineers or technicians or resources that can start drawing this data. So how can you make this as easy as possible, or make the systems actually prompt them or let them know, just not just an alert, but really what the problem is.
Yeah.
And from there, not wait until the problem happens, but actually again predict this is coming up and what they're supposed to do to help with that. And I see like just simple downtime, the understanding what the reason for downtime is, what your top downtime reasons. So you can actually focus on where do you need to put your resources in, rather than actually having the resources, the technical resources, spending so much time and wasting their time to dig through all these levels of data to find that. How how can you help them to quickly get to that so they can actually go get that fixed and make sure actually this doesn't happen again? So that's what these tools and again we spoke about GenAI, obviously trying how can you apply this to make sure that giving them the opportunity to get to the point where they understand, help them find the root cause and help them solve it.
So, I want to take a segue here. Like having visited factories myself, right? Like I've almost seen OE being captured or conveniently being, sort of manipulated to suit basically, the metrics sometimes. But I think they're just myths about OE, right? There's just so many misconceptions. Any funny story that comes to your mind, Ehab?
Yeah, I think it's the same funny story everywhere. It's when start looking into getting into the digital side and trying to get into real-time performance monitoring manufacturing and measure OEE in real time. Because most manufacturers start with like OEE is typically like best at weekly basis. Or again, best is like daily, but it really the best is I've seen is like when it's done manually or on a weekly basis. And it's typically communicated like weekly or monthly on a report to just give the overall site OEE. And it's exactly what you said. It's a target. It's one of the targets to make sure that again you're meeting your targets from a site wise. But getting it down to actually being a useful matrix, it's difficult. And it is being manipulated. It's difficult because everybody's aspiring to be, every manufacturer aspiring to be world class. And typically you see OEE communicated as 85, 95% or over 90%. But in reality, it's difficult to see what the real number is. So if you're doing that in a manual fashion and calculations, what I've seen is, yeah, many cases, well, you run out of material. It's machine is still okay. Well, let's do this as a planned downtime for maintenance. So that's the manual actually interventions. I don't want to say manipulation, but in many cases they just want to utilize the time. It's supposed to be a production time, but it changes to be actually planned time for maintenance. That kind of actually takes out that downtime that you had out of the equation and keeps your inflate OEE, but it's not the case. That's one of the things that I've seen. Again, many cases I've seen at manufacturers.
Do you see manufacturing leaders? I think one thing I know is that if you're collecting OE manually or just any data manually, right? Like I think it gives a directional insight. So it's more like I think you can use it as a control tool, but I don't think you can use it as a business tool. The question to you, in your experience, have you seen or do you see manufacturing leaders that if OE was available more real time automatically, would you see manufacturing leaders changing their business model to be more dynamic to their customers, whether it is in terms of pricing, whether it is in terms of the orders that they take, because they just have more control? What's your take there?
Well, absolutely. To finish actually what we were just discussing and get to this point is if it's manual, it's always meeting the target, so you never look into it. So that's one of the issues, and that's funny part. Because as long as manufacturers on a specific site, they have specific orders and their communicated capacity is met and their OE targets are met, everything is good and dandy. Everybody's happy. Once you start getting into real time, all of a sudden, my God, we thought it's 95 or 90. It's actually 60. Or I've seen it even lower than 50% when you start actually getting to real time. And that shock, okay, that's what gets, everybody just jumps in. Oh, we have a problem. And the first is denial, typically. That's not right. Then the next, okay, how are we going to fix this? And when you start looking at this, all of a sudden, everybody's looking into this because when you say I had 90%, now I'm at 50. Well, guess what? You can actually get more orders because you have 40% more untapped capacity.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what makes them, there is something here. So that's what it starts. Okay, I'm not looking into it because I'm good. Now it's real time. It's like I'm not waiting for somebody to calculate it. It's visible to the site and visible to actually above the site. So everybody's going to be looking at this real time. It's difficult at that point to say we don't have a problem.
So that's a very good example, Ehab. I think One thing that you mentioned there, which I really like, is I always used to think that if people implemented digital tools and to get real time, and if they found out that their OE went down, it was like a bad thing. But I think you put it very nice way that it's actually a good thing, because if there's demand out there in the market that you're trying to capture, you just unlocked a huge amount of capacity, which can straight away not only add to revenues, but it's just good for business. I think the companies where, or the industry, if you're struggling pretty much with demand itself, then I might see this as a problem. For companies that don't have a demand problem, this is huge. It's like unlocking significant efficiencies. That's a great point. I'm seeing one of the when it is basically real time. Is my understanding correct that if you would have to really do then Gen AI and all of those language models correctly, if data is the foundation, do you mean just raw data as a foundation, or more like OEE kind of data has to be correct as a foundation for Gen AI to work? What's your experience and take there?
So you start with raw data, but you need contextualized data to move to that level of applying actually use cases that will benefit, actually will have benefits that you can realize. So can we repeat this?
Yeah, we can just pause and we'll do it again.
So you start with the raw data, but you need to actually have contextualized data to get to apply the Gen AI, for example, and get benefit and being able actually to utilize and apply use cases that will actually help you to get benefits. When it comes to data, again, yes, you need the raw data, but if the raw data doesn't communicate actually more about the assets and what this data means, it will be very difficult to use. So you need to have the data in the right context for that particular asset. So you need to build an asset model with the right attributes. And at the same time, also making sure it's accessible. Because if you're gonna, this is the big word I'm gonna say here, integration. Okay, there is no one application that can do everything. So in manufacturing, you have your ERP system, you have manufacturing execution, manufacturing operation management, your asset management systems. You have multiple different software packages that you're using. And when it comes to data accessibility, you need to build actually a pipeline of data and an architecture that is going to make things flexible in terms of integrations going forward. Because you just sometimes you don't know what you're going to need when and
Sure.
how you're going to connect what. So building that and making sure we spoke about actually the type of data required already, and we said based on the KPIs, but also the process, what's available in the assets. The asset produce data, but it's not captured. Capture that, get it. You will need to use it as a history actually when you get to that point where you utilize the data. And so it's important to make sure it's not just the raw data, but the context around it actually, and building the data model, the models for the assets to
Sure.
make sure that at the end, when you apply actually Gen AI, for example, understand and actually need to also build a knowledge graph for the process to make sure that if you're going to have a use case, which again, there's a lot actually, again, a lot of opportunities I mentioned from Gen AI to support the technical actually resources, especially again with the skill gap that's going on in the market today. How can you get somebody up to speed to understand how to solve a problem and keep these assets and this equipment actually uptime going? So that's crucial. So this data is going to help again GenAI to go through, help to actually get into the drill down for you and help you find that root cause much faster if the data is available in the right actually context and normalized data. So it's not just the raw data, but it needs to be in the right context.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly here, what you're saying is that Gen AI applied on a raw data would probably give you basically insights. And those insights, the outcome is pretty much going to be to say, hey, go and contextualize this better so that I can give you better answers. But Gen AI applied on contextual or organized data. So whether, let's say, if I am capturing OE every day, every month, and then I want to look at trends on that using Gen AI or ask questions to Gen AI, then what I might be able to do is I might be able to get more information with which I can actually take decisions. Yeah, I may not be really be able to always take a decision if I just apply Gen AI on a raw data. Am I summarizing it well?
Yeah, it's close. I would say on raw data, I don't think even you can get any insights. You
Okay.
could get patterns. It's going to
Pat,
be more
okay.
like machine learning use
Okay.
cases. Just actually getting patterns. Hey, there is something here. There's some change. What does it mean? It's not really clear. When you apply actually the context to and build the model and making sure actually all these attributes of the assets are considered, now you can apply GenAI and now actually can build a knowledge graph that help you to really get to ask a question, and really GenAI can help get you to that root cause of the problem. And it's not just that, actually, as you mentioned, even if there is actually, again, prediction, getting to the point where prediction. So you start with actually being able to make decisions based on the information. It's going to help you, but it's going to actually help to predict, okay, things that you can do to avoid a air quality issue coming based on changes.
Understood. So, I mean, for all of this technology, obviously, none of this is possible, if culturally everybody's not aligned that, hey, transformation is needed. What's your experience there, like, working for the organizations that you have worked for in the automotive and electronics? What is really needed for that cultural shift to happen right now, Ehab?
So I think the cultural shift is happening. Yeah, it's being forced on manufacturers. And one of the reasons for that is the skill gap shortage. So that's one of the, it used to be, you have a lot of tribal knowledge going on and like when in manufacturers. And now with manufacturers not having these internal knowledge or worried about losing these actually experience operators, technicians retiring and trying to get actually new skills or new resources. And how do you actually transfer knowledge? How do you make things easier on this new generation coming in to be able to get up to speed quickly and solve problems? So that's one of the things that's actually pushing that cultural change. Also, the culture change in terms of the conversion between the business side and the IT side, because most of these solutions, when it comes to the latest technology, comes from the IT side. But there's typically was this gap between the business side and the IT side where you need to make sure the business see the value early on in the project and making sure they are part of being the stakeholder and part of that and align the project to solve the real problem for the business. Not just if you starting the project saying, okay, we're just going to do OEE measurement real time. Well, if it's not a problem for them today, it's not probably something they're going to be looking into. But when you start saying, okay, well, you have plans to spend $20 million on newer lines or newer assets because you're trying to increase your capacity to meet your demand. What if there's an opportunity to save that $20 million and maybe spend $1 million to improve your performance and get that visibility and help you actually improve that without having to add additional brick and mortar or additional lines.
Yeah.
And having that discussion early on and making sure how you're going to get there is crucial.
Sure.
And it helps actually in terms of the culture. So both sides needs to be open on the technical side, on the IT side, and on the business side, and making sure that's early on in the project to make sure that all the stakeholders are online.
How do you see new talent, settling in this transformation? Like, what kind of talent do you look for today? Like, what do you look for in them today?
Well, I don't think today, it used to be when you look for talents was experience. That's not the case anymore. Okay.
Okay.
So I think the talents we look for today is talents actually who are willing to learn. That's probably the most important. Okay. The attitude of just willing to learn. And at the same time, making sure that it's going to be actually exciting for them to be part of that. And it's exciting for them to actually to learn it. So it's not just finding the talent, and you need to cater to what these talents actually are looking for today. They are used to texting, they are used to digital gadgets all around, and you have to provide something similar to make sure that they are engaged and actually interested and continue to be interested. So whether that's actually, again, we spoke about real time and data and a lot of now is tablets, iPads, and having access to data and control at robotics arms or cobots and working with cobots directly. It's not having to do a repetitive task per se anymore.
Sure.
It's again, there's so much opportunities again, just again, how you program the robots, how you actually get more done out of these assets, as I mentioned earlier. The opportunities are there, and finding the talent that's actually willing to learn, finding a way to make sure that they get up to speed fast was bridging that skill gap. What is the available data? How can you actually apply Gen AI? And these are real use cases that we're working on to bridge that skill gap. Your equipment documentations, your existing tickets from maintenance history, any work instructions that exist today, building this knowledge base that exists and have Gen AI to work with these new talents in a conversational matter. I can go and ask what my alarms for today. I will tell you what the alarms for today and what you could do about them. A next step is you get the alert and it will just guide you through step by step, whether it's actually a video on how to repair that particular pump, rather than having to go and dig and find the information what that manual is today. It would take days to find this. You're just being able to quickly find this information and take actions.
Do you find yourself going back to school after so many years of experience?
You need to keep up with what's going on for sure, I have to say. It's crazy how quick the technology moving forward, especially with Gen AI. So yes, there are days, every day, I need to go and find something that you didn't know about because it's just moving too quickly.
On that lines, what would you recommend to other manufacturing leaders listening to this podcast? What would you ask them or have them learn? They get on this journey and just upgrade themselves, right, to be relevant.
Yeah, to your point, they have to be relevant to stay. They have to start looking into digital transformation to stay relevant in the industry. If they didn't actually do that, if they haven't started yet, I don't want to say it's too late. It's extremely important to make sure they get into this journey then as fast as possible. Going forward, manufacturer will be able to produce the same product with less cost. They will make more of it, and whoever can actually get to that point will stay in business, and the rest will go out. It's extremely important to make sure that you embrace the change in the industry and the technology, find ways to utilize what's available and find opportunities to improve. Otherwise, it's just they will not be in business going forward.
Just one question that was coming back into my mind. You spoke a lot about asset utilization. Asset in manufacturing, is it generally just the machines? It always comes across that we're only talking about machines. Are we only talking about machines?
When I say asset utilization, it's about machines. However, everybody that's working on these machines, you're still paying your technicians, your operators, everybody. So even though asset utilization is about machine, there's a cost associated with everybody involved with this particular asset. So the asset does improve the utilization of the equipment, but that translates to lower cost overall because you can get more done in less time. That means the cost of the labor, the cost of the indirect, direct. If you can build more within the same time frame, definitely you have a lower cost product.
At least in the US, there's a lot of effort that is being put into manufacturing. From that standpoint, how do you see the future of manufacturing here?
I do see the effort put into getting more manufacturing into the US. With that, I see significant opportunities when it comes to manufacturing in the US in order to keep cost low to compete with what's coming from overseas. In this case, you need to employ not just the automation, but finding ways to improve. Well, that's when it comes to the digital transformation, being able to produce, get more done at lower cost and less time. This just makes it crucial to look into the digital aspect, smart manufacturing and digital manufacturing, to get to the point where you can actually be comparable or compete with cost in general.
Do you see the business of manufacturers changing in the future? Are they going to call themselves a manufacturing company, or is that going to be something else?
I think a good example for that is Tesla. Tesla is a manufacturer for EVs, yes. At the same time, they embraced the Industry 4.0 digital transformation. So everybody get into software, not necessarily. I think manufacturers today going forward will be about finding and solving problems and innovations. It's not just actually doing what you've been doing for years. It's how you innovate going forward to stay relevant.
With that, I want to thank you, Ehab, for joining us in the studios. We leave all the listeners with this question that if you're a manufacturer, ask truly yourself, what are the innovations you are doing in your company along with your people to change your business model, if not adopt digital transformation, if not look at the future of manufacturing and how it applies to you. So with this, we come to the end of the episode. Ehab, thank you once again for joining us.
Nikhil, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.